people. Alright, welcome back. So, last week we finished the final book in the Narnia series, and we are going to start on something new. I've got Gulliver Travels. It is going to be very dry from what I remember, so if you're looking to listen to these to fall asleep, this might be for you. So we are going to start off on the introduction. I feel like because there's a contents page and it's got little descriptors. I'm not sure if I should read these. Part of me wants to, part of me feels like it might not be necessary. It's a summary of the chapter. I'll do for chapter 1 at least. Or does it have the introduction? Oh, it doesn't. Okay. So introduction. This is going to be on... I'm trying to figure out... I'm reading... Is this about the author or about Gulliver? Skip, 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 skip. Ah, yes, introductions about the author. I might read that as an extra at the end, but we will just skip straight to the story. Okay, so Gulliver's Travels, A Voyage to Lilliput. Chapter 1. The author gives some account of himself and family, his first inducements to travel. He is shipwrecked and swims for his life. Gets safe on shore in the country of Lilliput, is made a prisoner and carried up to the country. It's like spoilers. Whatever. My father had a small estate in Nottinghamshire. I was the third of 5 sons. He sent me to Emmanuel College in Cambridge at 14 years old, where I resided 3 years and applied myself close to my studies. But the charge of maintaining me, although I had some very scanty allowance, being too great for a narrow fortune, I was bound apprentice to Mr. James Bates, an eminent surgeon in London, with whom I continued 4 years. And my father now and then sending me small sums of money, I laid them out in learning navigation and other parts of the mathematics useful to those who intend to travel, as I always believed it would be, some time or another, my fortune to do. When I left Mr. Bates, I went down to my father, where, by the assistance of him and my Uncle John, and some other relations, I got £40 and a promise of £30 a year to maintain me at Leyden. There I studied physics 2 years and 7 months, knowing it would be useful in long voyages. Soon after my return from Leyden, I was recommended by my good master Mr. Bates to be surgeon to the Swallow, Captain Abraham Pannell, commander, with whom I continued 3 years and a half, making a voyage of 2 into the Levant and some other parts. When I came back, I resolved to settle in London, to which Mr. Bates, my master, encouraged me, and by him I was recommended to several patients. I took part of a small house in the old Jewry, and being advised to alter my condition, I married Mrs. Mary Burton, second daughter to Mr. Edmund Burton, hosier in Newgate Street, with whom I received £400 for a portion. But my good master Bates dying in 2 years after, and I having few friends, my business began to fail. For my conscience would not suffer me to imitate the bad practice of too many among my brethren. Having therefore consulted with my wife and some of my acquaintance, I determined to go again to sea. I was surgeon successfully in 2 ships, and made several voyages for 6 years, the East and West Indies, by which I got some addition to my fortune. My hours of leisure I spent in reading the best authors, ancient and modern, being always provided with a good number of books, and when I was ashore, in observing the manner and dispositions of the people, as well as learning their language, wherein I had great facility by the strength of my memory. The last of these voyages not proving very fortunate, I grew weary of the sea, and intended to stay at home with my wife and family. I removed from the old Jewry to Fetter Lane, and from thence to Wapping, hoping to get business among the sailors, but it would not turn to account. After 3 years' expectation that things would mend, I accepted an advantageous offer from Captain William Pritchard, master of the Antelope, who was making a voyage to the South Seas. We set sail from Bristol, May 4th, 1699, and our voyage at first was very prosperous. It It would not be proper, for some reasons, to trouble the reader with the particulars of our adventures in those seas. Let it suffice to inform him that in our passage from thence to the East Indies, we were driven by a violent storm to the northwest of Van Diemen's Land. By an observation, we found ourselves in the latitude of 30 degrees 2 minutes south. 12 of our crew were dead by immoderate labor and ill food. The rest were in very weak condition. On the 5th of November, which was the beginning of summer in those parts, the weather being very hazy, the seamen spied a rock within half a cable's length of the ship. But the wind was so strong that we were driven directly upon it and split. 6 of the crew, whom I was one, having let down the boat into the sea, made a shift to get clear of the ship and the rock. We rowed, by my computation, about 3 leagues, till we were able to work no longer, being already spent with labor while we were in the ship. We therefore trusted ourselves to the mercy of the waves, and in about half an hour the boat was overset by a sudden flurry from the north. What became of my companions in the boat, as well as those who escaped on the rock were left in the vessel, I cannot tell, but concluded that they were all lost. Pardon me. For my own part, I swam as fortune directed me, and was pushed forwards by the wind and tide. I often let my legs drop, and could feel no bottom, but when I was almost gone, and able to struggle no longer, I found myself within my depth, and by this time the storm was much abated. The decivity was so small that I walked near a mile before I got to the shore, which I conjectured was about 8 o'clock in the evening. I then advanced forwards near half a mile, but could not discover any sign of houses or inhabitants. At least, I was in so weak a condition that I did not observe them. I was extremely tired, and with that, and the heat and the weather, and about half a pint of brandy that I drank as I left the ship, I found myself much inclined to sleep. I lay down on the grass, which was very short and soft, where I slept sounder than I ever remembered to have done in my life, and, as I reckoned, about 9 hours, for when I awakened it was just daylight, I attempted to rise, but was not able to stir, for as I happened to lie on my back, I found my arms and legs were strongly fastened on each side to the ground, and my hair, which was long and thick, tied down in the same manner. I likewise felt several slender ligatures across my body, from my armpits to my thighs. I could only look upwards. The sun began to grow hot, and the light offended my eyes. I heard a confused noise about me, but in the posture I lay, could see nothing except the sky. In a little time I felt something alive moving on my left leg, which, advancing greatly forward over my breast, came almost up to my chin, when, bending my eyes downward as much as I could, I perceived it to be a human creature not 6 inches high, with a bow and arrow in his hands and a quiver at his back. In the meantime, I felt at least 40 more of the same kind, as I conjectured, following the first. I was in the utmost astonishment, and roared so loud that they all ran back in a fright, and some of them, as I was afterwards told, were hurt with the falls they got by leaping from my sides upon the ground. However, they soon returned, and one of them, who ventured so far as to get a full sight of my face, lifting up his hands and eyes by way of admiration, cried out in a shrill but distinct voice, "Hekina degul." The others repeated the same words several times, but I then knew not what they meant. I lay all this while, as the reader may believe, in great uneasiness. At length, struggling to get loose, I had the fortune to break the strings and wrench out the pegs that fastened my left arm to the ground, for by lifting it to my face I discovered the methods they had taken to bind me. At the same time, with a violent pull, which gave me excessive pain, I a little loosened the strings that tied down my... That is a weird phrasing. I a little loosened the strings that tied down my hair on the left side, so that I was able to turn my head about 2 inches. But the creatures ran off a second time before I could seize them, whereupon there was a great shout in a very shrill accent, and after it ceased I heard one of them cry out, "Tolgo Phonak," when in an instant I felt above 100 arrows discharged on my left hand, which pricked me like so many needles, and besides they shot another flight into the air, as we do bombs in Europe, whereof many, I suppose, fell on my body, though I felt them not, and some on my face, which I immediately covered with my left hand. When this shower of arrows was over, I felt a groaning with grief and pain, and then striving again to get loose, they discharged another volley larger than the first, with some of them attempting with spears to stick me in the sides, but by good luck I had on me a buff jerkin, which they could not pierce. I thought it the most prudent method to lie still, and my design was to continue so till night, when, my left hand being already loose, I could easily free myself. And as for the inhabitants, I had reason to believe I might be a match for the greatest army they could bring against me, if they were all of the same size with him that I saw. But fortune disposed otherwise of me. When the people observed I was quiet, they discharged no more arrows. But by the noise I heard, I knew their numbers increased, and about 4 yards from me, over against my right ear, I heard a knocking for above an hour, like that of people at work, when, turning my head that way as well as the pegs and strings would permit me, I saw a stage erected, about 1.5 feet from the ground, capable of holding 4 of the inhabitants, with 2 or 3 ladders to mount it. From whence one of them, who seemed to be a person of quality, made me a long speech, whereof I understood not one syllable. But I should have mentioned that, before the principal person began his oration, he cried out 3 times, Langro de Hul San. These words in the former were afterwards repeated and explained to me. Whereupon immediately about 50 of the inhabitants came and cut the strings that fastened my left side of my head, which gave me the liberty to turning it to the right, and of observing the person and gesture of him that was to speak. He appeared to be of middle age, and taller than any of the other 3 who attended him, whereof one was a page, that held up his train, and seemed to be somewhat longer than my middle finger, and the other two stood on each side to support him. He acted every part of an orator, and I could observe many periods of threatenings, and others of promises, pity, and kindness. I answered in a few words, but in the most submissive manner, lifting up my left hand and both my eyes to the sun, as calling him for a witness. And being almost famished with hunger, having not eaten a morsel for some hours before I left the ship, I found the demands of nature so strong upon me that I could not forbear showing my impatience, perhaps against the strict rules of decency, by putting my fingers frequently to my mouth to signify that I wanted food. The Hergo, for so they call a great lord, as I afterwards learnt, understood me very well. He descended from the stage and commanded that several ladders should be applied to my sides, on which above 100 of the inhabitants mounted, and walked towards my mouth, laden with baskets full of meat, which had been provided and sent thither, I guess it's thither, by the king's orders upon the first intelligence he received of me. I observed there was the flesh of several animals, but I could not distinguish them by the taste. There were shoulders, legs, and loins shaped like those of mutton, and very well dressed, but smaller than the wings of a lark. I ate them by 2 or 3 at a mouthful, and took 3 loaves at a time, about the bigness of a musket bullets. They supplied me as fast as they could, showing 1,000 marks of wonder and astonishment at my bulk and appetite. I then made another sign that I wanted drink. They found by my eating that a small quantity could not suffice me, and being a most ingenious people, they slung up with great dexterity one of their largest hogsheads, and rolled it towards my hand, and beat out the top. I drank it off at a draught, which I might well do, for it did not hold half a pint, and tasted like a small wine of Burgundy, but much more delicious. They brought me a second hogshead, which I drank in the same manner, and made signs for more, but they had none to give me. When I had performed these wonders, they shouted for joy, and danced upon my breast, repeating several times, as they did at first, Hakanan Degu. They made a sign that I should throw down 2 hogsheads. Throw down the 2 hogsheads. Don't know what those are. Is it hogsheads or hogsheads? Love. Can you look up whether it's hogsheads or hogsheds? I'm actually not. H-O-G, no spaces, S-H-E-A-D-S. S-H-E-A-D-S. But is it hogshead or hogshed? Yes, please. All right, 2 hogsheads. And how much is the volume? Sorry. We'll do both. $238 liters? Not milliliters? I guess he's comparing them to their sizes? Alright, I apologize. Because there's no... whatever. I assumed so, but... like, so their version of, like, the big barrels. So how many? 238 liters. So very nearly 250 liters. Okay. I'm assuming he's saying for them, said not quite a pint. That's probably close to like a cup for him, I'm guessing. Like 250 liters being like 1 cup. Okay. Good to know. They made me a sign that I should throw down the 2 hogsheads, but first warning the people below to stand out of the way, crying aloud, Broach Mavola. And when they saw the vessels in the air, there was a universal shout of Hakanan de Gul. I confess I was often tempted when they were passing backwards and forwards on my body to seize 40 or 50 of the first that came in my reach and dash them against the ground. But the remembrance of what I had felt, which probably might not be the worst they could do, and the promise of honor I made them, for so I interpreted my submissive behavior, soon drove out these imaginations. Besides, I now considered myself as bound by the laws of hospitality to a people who had treated me with so much expense and magnificence. However, in my thoughts I could not sufficiently wonder at the intrepidity of these diminutive mortals, who durst venture to mount and walk upon my body, while one of my hands was at liberty, without trembling at the very sight of so prodigious a creature as I must appear to them. After some time, when they observed that I made no more demands for mead, there appeared before me a person of high rank from his Imperial Majesty. His Excellency, having mounted on the small of my right leg, advanced forwards up to my face with about a dozen of his retinue. Producing his credentials upon the signet royal, which he applied close to my eyes, spoke about 10 minutes without any signs of anger, but with a kind of determinate resolution often pointing forwards, which, as I afterwards found, was towards the capital city, about half a mile distant, whither it was agreed by his Majesty in council that I must be conveyed. I answered in a few words, but to no purpose, and made a sign with my hand that was loose, putting it to the other, but over his Excellency's head, for fear of hurting him or his train, and then to my own head and body, to signify that I desired my liberty. It appeared that he understood me well enough, for he shook his head by way of disapprobation, and held his hand... Oops. Sorry, I knocked my surface. And held his hand in a posture to show that I must be carried as a prisoner. However, he made other signs to let me understand that I should have meat and drink enough, and very good treatment, whereupon I once more thought of attempting to break my bonds, but again, when I felt the smart of their arrows upon my face and hands, which were all in blisters, and many of the darts still sticking in them, and observing likewise that the number of my enemies increased, I gave tokens to let them know that they might do with me what they pleased. Upon this, the Hurgo and his train withdrew, with much civility and cheerful countenances. Soon after, I heard a general shout, with frequent repetitions of the word Peplum Selan. One moment. Yeah, poor Ceequin. Oh, where was I? Soon after I heard a general shout with frequent repetitions of the words Peplum Selan, and I felt great numbers of people on my left side, relaxing the cords to such a degree that I was able to turn upon my right side. But before this, they had daubed my face and both my hands with a sort of ointment, very pleasant to the smell, which in a few minutes removed all of the smarts of their arrows. These circumstances, added to the refreshment I had received by their victuals and drink, which was very nourishing, disposed me to sleep. I slept about 8 hours, as I was afterwards assured, and it was no wonder, for the physicians, by the Emperor's order, had mingled the sleepy potion in the hogsheads of wine. It seemed that upon the first moment I was discovered sleeping on the grounds after my landing, the Emperor had early notice of it by an express and determined in council that I should be tied in the manner I have related, which was done in the night while I slept, that plenty of meat and drink should be sent me, and a machine prepared to carry me to the capital city. This resolution, perhaps, may appear very bold and dangerous, and I am confident would not be imitated by any prince in Europe on the like occasion. However, in my opinion, it was extremely prudent, as well as generous, for, supposing these people had endeavored to kill me with their spears and arrows while I was asleep, I should certainly have awakened with the first sense of smart, which might so far have roused my rage and strength as to have enabled me to break the strings wherewith I was tied, after which, as they were not able to make resistance, so they could expect no mercy. These people are most excellent mathematicians, and arrived to a great perfection in mechanics by the countenance and encouragement of the Emperor, who is a renowned patron of learning. This prince has several machines fixed on wheels for the carriage of trees and other great weights. He often builds his largest men of war, whereof some of 9 feet long, in the woods where the timber grows, and has them carried on these engines 300 or 400 yards to the sea. 500 carpenters and engineers were immediately set at work to prepare the great engine they had. It was a frame of wood, raised 3 inches from the ground, about 7 feet long and 4 feet wide, moving upon 22 wheels. The shout I heard was upon the arrival of this engine, which it seemed set out on 4 hours after my landing. It was brought parallel to me as I lay. But the principal difficulty was to raise and place me in this vehicle. 80 poles, each of 1 foot high, were erected for this purpose, and very strong cords, of the bigness of pack threads, were fastened by hooks to many bandages, which the workmen had grit around my neck, my hands, my body, and my legs. 900 of the strongest men were employed to draw upon these cords, by many pulleys fastened on the poles, and thus, in less than 3 hours, I was raised and slung into the engine, and there tied fast. All this, I was told, for while the operation was performing, I lay in a profound sleep, by the force of that soporiferous medicine infused into my liquor. 1,500 of the Emperor's largest horses, each about 4.5 inches high, were employed to draw me towards the metropolis, which, as I said, was half a mile distant. About 4 hours after we began our journey, I awakened by a very ridiculous accident. For the carriage, being stopped a while to adjust something that was out of order, 2 or 3 of the young natives had the curiosity to see how I looked when I was asleep. They climbed up into the engine, and advancing very softly to my face, one of them, an officer in the guard, put the sharp end of his half-pike a good way up into my left nostril, which tickled my nose like straw, and made me sneeze violently, whereupon they stole off unperceived, and it was 3 weeks before I knew the cause of my waking so suddenly. We made a long march the remaining part of the day, and rested all night, with 500 guards on each side of me, half with torches and half with bows and arrows, ready to shoot me if I should offer to stir. The next morning at sunrise we continued our march, and arrived within 200 yards of the city gates about noon. The Emperor and all his court came out to meet us, but his great officers would by no means suffer his Majesty to endanger his person by mounting on my body. Thank you, love. At the place where the carriage stopped, there stood an ancient temple, esteemed by the largest in the whole kingdom, which, having been polluted some years before by an unnatural murder, was, according to the zeal of these people, looked upon as profane, and therefore had been applied to common use, and all the ornaments and furniture carried away. In this edifice it was determined I should lodge. The great gate fronting the north was about 4 feet high and about 2 feet wide, through which I could easily creep. On each side of the gate was a small window, not above 6 inches from the ground. Into that on the left side, the king's smith conveyed 411 chains, like those that hang to a lady's watch in Europe, and almost as large, which were locked to my left leg with 36 padlocks. I feel like even if it was a tiny lock, they didn't even need a lock because, like, it's no way he could undo them. He'd be too big to lockpick anything. Over against this temple, on the other side of the great highway, at 20 feet distance, there was a turret, at least 5 feet high. Here the emperor ascended with many principal lords of his court to have an opportunity of viewing me, as I was told, for I could not see them. It was reckoned that above 100,000 inhabitants came out of the town upon the same errand, and in spite of my guards, I believe there could not be fewer than 10,000 at several times who mounted my body by the help of ladders. But a proclamation was soon issued to forbid it upon pain of death, when the workmen found it was impossible for me to break loose. When the workmen found it was impossible for me to break loose, they cut all the strings that bound me, whereupon I rose up with as melancholy a disposition as ever I had in my life. But the noise and astonishment of the people at seeing me rise and walk are not to be expressed. The chain that held my left leg was about 2 yards long, and gave me not only the liberty of walking backwards and forwards in a semicircle, but being fixed within 4 inches of the gate, allowed me to creep in and lie at my full length in the temple. There's chapter 1. So, chapter 2. The Emperor of Lilliput, attended by several of the nobility, come to see the author in his confinement. The Emperor's person and habit described, learned men appointed to teach the author their language. He gains favor by his mild disposition. His pockets are searched, and his sword and pistol taken from him. When I found myself on my feet, I looked about me, and must confess I never beheld a more entertaining prospect. The country around me appeared like a continued garden, and the enclosed fields, which were generally 40 feet square, resembled so many beds of flowers. These fields were intermingled with woods of half a stang, an old word for a pole or perch, 16 feet and a half. Of half a stang, and the tallest trees, as I could judge, appeared to be 7 feet high. I viewed the town on my left hand, which looked like the painted scenes of a city in a theater. I soon came out of my house, having occasion for fresh air. The Emperor was already descended from the... Sorry, I thought I saw a message. Oh, hi, Carrie. Welcome. We're reading Gulliver Travels. It is very dry, but that's fine. Carrie's the first. I soon came out of my house, having occasion for fresh air. The Emperor was already descended from his tower, and advancing on horseback towards me, which had to have cost him dear, for the beast, though very well trained, yet wholly unused to such a sight, which appeared as if a mountain moved before him, reared up on his hinder feet. That prince, who is an excellent horseman, kept his seat till his attendants ran in and held the bridle, while his majesty had time to dismount. When he alighted, he surveyed me round with great admiration, but kept beyond the length of my chain. He ordered his cooks and butlers, who were already prepared, to give me victuals and drink, which they pushed forwards in a sort of vehicle upon wheels, till I could reach them. I took these vehicles and soon emptied them all. 20 of them were filled with meat and 10 with liquor. Each of the former afforded me 2 or 3 good mouthfuls, and I emptied the liquor of 10 vessels, which was contained in earthen vials, into one vehicle, drinking it off at a draught. And so I did with the rest. The Empress, the Empress and young princes of the blood of both sexes, attended by many ladies, sat at some distance in their chairs. But upon the accident that happened to the Emperor's horse, they alighted and came near his person, which I am now going to describe. He is taller by almost the breadth of my nail than any of his court, which alone is enough to strike an awe into the beholders. His features are strong and masculine, with an Austrian lip and arched nose, his complexion olive, his countenance erect, his body and limbs well proportioned, all of his motions graceful, and and his deportment majestic. He was then past his prime, being 28 years and 3/4 old, of which he had reigned about 7 in great felicity, and generally victorious. For the better convenience of beholding him, I lay on my side so that my face was parallel to his, and he stood but 3 yards off. However, I've had him since many times in my hand, and therefore cannot be deceived in the description. His dress was very plain and simple, and the fashion of it between the... That is a weird word. Right? Well, to be fair, their methods of attack was like arrows, so maybe 30s? Yeah. It's the 1700s. Speaking of somebody in the medieval ages, I could see maybe the 30s being past prime. I'm struggling how to pronounce this word. I think it's supposed to define the clothing dress, supposed to be somewhat a combo of Asian and European. But they're saying Asias. I'm not sure because there's Asian, but they're saying Asiastic, and that's a very weird word. Sorry. And the fashion of it between the Asiatic and the European. What was off by about 60 years? Oh, what you put in? Yeah, I don't know when I got, like, how old this book is. It doesn't have a publishing date. The closest I've got is a little somebody wrote in the front of it, and I can't even see the name, but it says 1965, so it might have been gifted at 1965. Anyways. There it is. But he had on his head a light helmet of gold adorned with jewels and a plume on the crest. He held his sword drawn in his hand to defend himself if I should happen to break loose. It was almost 3 inches long, the hilt and scabbard were gold enriched with diamonds. His voice was shrill, but very clear and articulate, and I could distinctly hear it when I stood up. The ladies and courtiers were all most magnificently clad, so that the spot they stood upon seemed to resemble a petticoat spread upon the ground, embroidered with figures of gold and silver. His Imperial Majesty spoke often to me, and I returned answers, but neither of us could understand a syllable. There were several of his priests and lawyers present, as I conjectured by their habits, who were commanded to address themselves to me, and I spoke to them in as many languages as I had the least smattering of, which were High and Low Dutch, Latin, French, Spanish, Italian, and lingua franca, but all to no purpose. After about 2 hours the court retired, and I was left with a strong guard to prevent the impertinence and probably the malice of the rabble, who were very impatient to crowd about me as near as they durst. And some of them had the impudence to shoot their arrows at me as I sat on the ground by the door of my house, whereof one very narrowly missed my left eye. But the colonel ordered 6 of the ringleaders to be seized, and thought no punishment so proper as to deliver them bound into my hands, which some of the soldiers accordingly did, pushing them forwards with the butt ends of their pikes into my reach. Yeah, they got arrows and pikes and swords, so... Oh. I'm thinking medieval era. I took them all into my right hand, and put 5 of them into my coat pocket. As to the 6th, I made a countenance as if I would eat him alive. Oh, goodness. A countenance as if I would eat him alive. The poor man squalled terribly, and the colonel and his officers were in much pain, especially when they saw me take out my penknife. But I soon put them out of fear, for looking mildly and immediately cutting the strings he was bound with, I set him gently on the ground, and away he ran. I treated the rest in the same manner, taking them one by one out of my pocket, and I observed both the soldiers and the people were highly delighted at this mark of my clemency, which was represented very much to my advantage at court. Towards night I got with some difficulty into my house, where I lay on the ground, and continued to do so about a fortnight, during which time the emperor gave orders to have a bed prepared for me. 600 beds of the common measure were brought in carriages and worked up into my house. 150 of their beds sewn together made up the breadth and length, and these were 4 doubled, which, however, kept me but very indifferently from the hardness of the floor. There was a smooth stone. By the same computation, they provided me with sheets, blankets, coverlets tolerable enough for one who had been so long inured to hardship. Thank you. I shall take a drink. Welcome to the reading. As the news of my arrival spread through the kingdom, it brought prodigious numbers, rich, idle, and curious people to see me, so that the villages were almost emptied. And great neglect of tillage and household affairs must have ensued if His Imperial Majesty had not provided by several proclamations and orders of state against this inconveniency. He directed that those who had already beheld me should return home, and not presume to come within 50 yards of my house without license from the court, whereby the Secretary of State got considerable fees. In the meantime, the Emperor held frequent councils to debate what should be taken with me, and I was afterwards assured by a particular friend, a person of great quality, who was as much in the secret as any, that the court was under many difficulties concerning me. He apprehended my breakage loose, that my diet would be very expensive. They apprehended my breakage loose, that my diet would be very expensive and might cause a famine. Sometimes they determined to starve me, or to at least shoot me in the face and hands with poisonous arrows, which would soon dispatch me. But again, they considered that the stench of so large a carcass might produce a plague in the metropolis, and probably spread through the whole kingdom. In the midst of these consultations, several officers of the army went to the door of the great council chamber, and 2 of them being admitted, gave an account of my behavior to the 6 criminals above mentioned, which made so favorable an impression in the breast of His Majesty and the whole board in my behalf, that an imperial commission was issued out, obliging all the villagers 900 yards round the city to deliver in every morning 6 bevies, 40 sheep, and other victuals to my sustenance, together with a proportionable quantity of bread and wine and other liquors, for the due payment of which His Majesty gave assignments upon his treasury. For this prince lives chiefly upon his own I feel like I should know this word. Nope. I get stumped by a word. One moment. Looking up a word. Land attached to a manor and retained for the owner's own use. Where's the old... Oh, interesting. Okay. It's weird spelling. It's Demesnes. Looks like it spells Demesnes, but it literally, you pronounce it domain. Domain. I would not have guessed that. Okay. For this prince lives chiefly out of his own domain, seldom except upon great occasions, raising any subsidies upon his subjects, who are bound to attend him in the wars at their own expense. An establishment was also made of 600 persons to be my domestics, who had board wages allowed for their maintenance, and tents built for them very conveniently on each side of my door. It was likewise ordered that 300 tailors should make me a suit of clothes after the fashion of this country, that 6 of His Majesty's greatest scholars should be employed to instruct me in their language, and lastly, that the Emperor's horses and those of the nobility and troops of guards should be frequently exercised in my sight, to accustom themselves to me. Excuse me. All these orders were duly put in execution, and in about 3 weeks I made a great progress in learning their language. during which time the emperor frequently honored me with his visits and was pleased to assist my masters in teaching me. We began already to converse together in some sort, and the first words I learned were to express my desire that he would be pleased to give me my liberty, which I every day repeated on my knees. His answer, as I could apprehend it, was that this must be a work of time, not to be thought on without the advice of his council, and that first I must lumos kelmin peso desmar lon emposa. That is, spear a peace with him and his kingdom. Oh, swear a peace with him and his kingdom. However, that I should be used with all kindness. And he advised me to acquire by my patience and discreet behavior the good opinion of himself and his subjects. He desired I would not take it ill if he gave orders to certain proper officers to search me, for probably I might carry about me several weapons, which must needs be dangerous things if they answered the bulk of so prodigious a person. I said His Majesty should be satisfied, for I was ready to strip myself and turn out my pockets before him. This I delivered, part in words and part in signs. He replied that by the laws of the kingdom I must be searched by 2 of his officers, that he knew this could not be done without my consent and assistance, and he had so good an opinion of my generosity and justice as to trust their persons in my hands, that whatever they took from me should be returned when I left the country, or paid for at the rate which I would set upon them. I took up the 2 officers in my hands, put them first in my coat pockets, and then into every other pocket about me, except my 2 fobs, and another secret pocket, which I had no mind should be searched, wherein I had some little necessaries that were of no consequence to any but myself. In one of my fobs there was a silver watch, and in the other a small quantity of gold in a purse. These gentlemen, having pens, ink, and paper about them, made an exact inventory of everything they saw, and when they had done, desired I would set them down, that they might deliver it to the emperor. This inventory I afterwards translated into English, and is word for word as follows. Oh my gosh. Okay. Imprimis, in the right coat pocket of the great man mountain, for so I interpret the words quinbus flestrin. After the strictest search, we found only one great piece of coarse cloth, large enough to be a footcloth for your Majesty's chief room of state. In the left pocket we saw a huge silver chest with a cover of the same metal, which we, the searchers, were not able to lift. We desired it should be opened, and one of us, stepping into it, found himself up to mid-length in a sort of dust, some part of which, flying up into our faces, set us both a-sneezing for several times together. In his right waistcoat pocket we found a prodigious bundle of white thin substance, folded one over another, about the bigness of 3 men, tied with a strong cable, and marked with black figures, which we humbly conceived to be writings, every letter almost half as large as the palm of our hands. In the left there was a sort of engine, from the back of which were extended 20 long poles, resembling the palisadoes before your Majesty's court. It feels like that should be palisades. It's just spelled weird. Wherewith we conjecture the Man Mountain combs his head, for we did not always trouble him with questions, because we found it of great difficulty to make him understand us. In the large pocket on the right side of his middle cover, so I translate the words ranfoulot, by which they meant my breeches, we saw a hollow pillar of iron about the length of a man, fastened to a strong piece of timber larger than the pillar, and upon one side of the pillar were huge pieces of iron sticking out, cut into strange figures, which we know not what to make of. In the left pocket another engine of the same kind. In the smaller pocket on the right side were several round flat pieces of white and red metal, a different bulk. Some of the white, which seemed to be silver, were so large and heavy that my comrade and I could hardly lift them. In the left pocket were 2 black pillars irregularly shaped. We could not without difficulty reach the top of them, as we stood at the bottom of his pocket. One of them was covered and seemed all of a piece, but at the upper end of the other there appeared to be a white round substance, about twice the bigness of our heads. Within each of these was enclosed a prodigious plate of steel, which by our orders we obliged him to show us, because we apprehended that they might be dangerous engines. He took them out of their cases, and told us in his own country his practice was to shave his beard with one of these, and cut his meat with the other. There were 2 pockets which we could not enter. These he called his fobs. There were 2 large slits cut into the tops of his middle cover, but squeezed close by the pressure of his body. Out of the right fob hung a great silver chain, with a wonderful kind of engine at the bottom. We directed him to draw out whatever was at the end of the chain, which appeared to be a globe, half silver, and half of some transparent metal, for on the transparent side we saw certain strange figures circularly drawn, and thought we should touch them, till we found our fingers stopped by that lucid substance. So whatever this country's development stages, they have not developed glass yet. He put this engine to our ears, which made an incessant noise, like that of a water-mill, and we conjecture it is either some unknown animal or the god that he worships. But we are more inclined to the latter option, because he assured us, if we understand him right, for he has expressed himself very imperfectly, that he seldom did anything without consulting it. He called it his oracle, and said it pointed out the time for every action of his life. From the left fob he took out a net almost as large enough for a fisherman, but contrived to open and shut like a purse, and served him for the same use. We found therein several massy pieces of yellow metal, which, if they be real gold, must be of an immense value. Having thus, in obedience to your Majesty's commands, diligently searched all his pockets, we observed a girdle about his waist, made of the hide of some prodigious animal, from which on the left side hung a sword of the length of 5 men, and on the right a bag or pouch divided into 2 cells, each cell capable of holding 3 of your Majesty's subjects. In one of these cells were several globes or balls of a most ponderous metal, about the bigness of our heads, and required a strong hand to lift them. The other cell contained a heap of certain black grains, but of no great bulk or weight, for we could hold about 50 of them in the palms of our hands. This is an exact inventory of what we found about the body of the Man-Mountain, who used us with great civility in due respect to your Majesty's commission. Signed and sealed on the 4th day of the 89th moon of your Majesty's auspicious reign. Clefrin Frelock and Marcy Frelock. My gosh. When this inventory was read over to the Emperor, he directed me, although in very gentle terms, to deliver up the several particulars. He first called for my scimitar, which I took out, scabbard and all. In the meantime, he ordered 3,000 of the choicest troops, who then attended him, to surround me at a distance, with their bows and arrows just ready to discharge, but I did not observe it, for mine eyes were wholly fixed on his Majesty. He then desired me to draw my scimitar, which, although it had got some rust by the sea water, was in most parts exceedingly bright. I did so, and immediately all the troops gave a shout between terror and surprise, for the sun shone clear, and the reflection dazzled their eyes, as I waved the scimitar to and fro in my hand. His Majesty, who is a most magnanimous prince, was less daunted than I could expect. He ordered me to return it to my scabbard, and cast it on the ground as gently as I could, about 6 feet from the end of my chain. The next thing he demanded was one of my hollow iron pillars, by which he meant my pocket pistols. I drew it out, and at his desire as well as I could, expressed to him the use of it, and charging it only with powder, which by the closeness of my pouch happened to escape wetting by the sea, an inconvenience against which all prudent marines take special care to provide. I first cautioned the Emperor not to be afraid, and that I let it off, then I let it off in the air. The astonishment here was much greater than at the sight of the scimitar. Hundreds fell down as if they had been struck dead, and even the Emperor, although he stood his ground, could not recover himself for some time. I delivered up both my pistols in the same manner as I had done my scimitar, and then my pouch of powder and bullets, begging him that the former might be kept from fire, for it would kindle with the small spark and blow up his imperial palace into the air. I likewise delivered up my watch, which the Emperor was very curious to see, and commanded 2 of his tallest yeomen of the guard to bear it on a pole upon their shoulders, as draymen in England do to a barrel of ale. He was amazed at the continual noise it made, and the motion of the minute hand, which he could easily discern, for their sight is much more acute than ours. He asked the opinions of his learned men about it, which were various and remote, as the reader may well imagine without my repeating, although indeed I could not very particularly understand them. I then gave up my silver and copper money, my purse with 9 large pieces of gold, and some smaller ones. my knife and razor, my comb and silver snuff box, my handkerchief and journal book. My scimitar, pistols, and pouch were conveyed in carriages to His Majesty's stores, but the rest of my goods were returned to me, and there's an asterisk here. It says, investigations such as Swift here describes are very familiar to the men of his time. For many years after the Hanover family came to the throne, a suspicious watchfulness was maintained over the movements of the Jacobite party. Houses and persons were constantly searched for arms or evidence of treasonous intent. Especially was this the case in Ireland. It is told of one unfortunate Irishman that, wearied out and disgusted by the incessant scrutiny of which he was subjected, he gave up the government of his poker, tongs, and shovel, and took a formal receipt by the property thus surrendered. Swift shared the general indignation at these vexatious proceedings, which he did not miss the opportunity to ridicule. Gulliver tells a Laputan professor that the bulk of the English people consist of discoverers, witnesses, informers, accusers, prosecutors, swearers, and all under the pay of ministers of state. End of asterisks. I had, as I before observed, one private pocket, which escaped their search, wherein there was a pair of spectacles, which I sometimes used for the weakness of mine eyes, a pocket perspective, and some other little conveniences, which, being of no consequence to the Emperor, I did not think myself bound in honour to discover, and I apprehended they might be lost or spoiled if I ventured them out of my possession. I wonder if he's talking about, like, tobacco. But he had a snuff box, and whatever. Chapter 3. The author diverts the Emperor. Have we reached ad time? Okay. The author diverts the Emperor and his nobility of both sexes in a very uncommon manner. The diversions of the court of Lilliput described. The author has his liberty granted him upon certain conditions. My gentleness and good behavior have gained so far on the Emperor that the court and his court, and indeed upon the army and people in general, that I began to conceive hopes of gaining my liberty in a short time. I took all possible methods to cultivate this favorable disposition. The natives came, by degree, to be less apprehensive of any danger from me. I would sometimes lie down and let 5 or 6 of them dance on my head, and at last the boys and girls would venture to come and play and hide and seek in my hair. I had now made a good progress in understanding and speaking their language. The Emperor had a mind one day to entertain me with several of the country's shows, wherein they exceeded all nations I have known, both for dexterity and magnificence. I was diverted with none so much as that of the rope dancers, performed upon a slender white thread extended about 2 feet and 12 inches from the ground, upon which I shall desire liberty, with the reader's patience, to enlarge a little. This diversion is only practiced by those persons who are candidates for great employments and high favour at court. They are trained in this art from their youth, and are not always of noble birth or liberal education. When a great office is vacant, either by death or disgrace, which often happens, 5 or 6 of those candidates petition the Emperor to entertain His Majesty in the court with a dance on the ropes, and whoever jumps the highest, without falling, succeeds in the office. Very often the chief ministers themselves are commanded to show their skill, and to convince the Emperor that they have not lost their faculty. Flimnap, asterisk. It has been always held that Swift's points here to Sir Robert Walpole. Swift has long regarded Sir Robert with feelings of hostility, and about this time was specially incensed by the neglect with which men of letters were. I am going to skip these. The asterisks seem to be commentaries from the publication about his works. And I know that he was criticized for being extremely misanthropic, so he criticized humanity as a whole and human nature. And there's excerpts, or there's sections of this book that has been not published for that reason. And I feel like some of the commentary is being pointed out for that, and I'm just going to skip it and just read the works as it is. If you want to go into the extra details, you can look it up. The treasurer is allowed to cut a caper on the straight rope at least an inch higher than any other lord in the whole empire. I have seen him do this somersault several times together upon a trencher fixed on a rope which is no thicker than a common pack thread in England. My friend, the name, Uh, Reldrizel? Reldrizel, we'll just say that. Principal Secretary for Private Affairs is, in my opinion, if I am not partial, the second after the Treasurer. The rest of the great officers are much upon a par. These diversions are often attended with fatal accidents, whereof great numbers are on record. I myself have seen 2 or 3 candidates break a limb, but the danger is much greater when the ministers themselves are commanded to show their dexterity, for by contending to excel themselves and their fellows, they strain so far that there is hardly one of them who has not received a fall, and some of them 2 or 3. I was assured that a year or 2 before my arrival, Flimnap would infallibly have broken his neck, if one of the king's cushions that accidentally lay on the ground had not weakened the force of his fall. There is likewise other diversions, which is only shown before the emperor and empress and the first minister upon particular occasions. The emperor lays on the table 3 fine silken threads of 6 inches long. One is blue and the other red, and the third green. These threads are proposed as prizes for those persons whom the emperor has a mind to distinguish by particular mark of his favor. The ceremony is performed in His Majesty's great chamber of state, where the candidates are to undergo a trial of dexterity very different from the former, and such as I have not observed the least resemblance of in any other country or of the New or Old World. The emperor holds a stick in his hands, both ends parallel to the horizon, while the candidates advancing one by one sometimes leap over the stick, sometimes creep under it, backwards and forwards several times. Thank you for the heads up. Oh, the book. The book is so dry. It seems so silly. How are our viewers, or listeners, I guess? Hope you're having a good evening. Yeah, I was checking out the beginning of this book. Right underneath the... I suppose this is the publishing company. It says this text is complete except for the omission of 1 or 2 unsuitable passages. And I'm really curious what they consider unsuitable for printing. Also says, in case you were curious, Jonathan Swift was born in Dublin on the 30th November 1667, educated at Kilkenny School and Trinity College, Dublin, in 1700, and died in Dublin on 19th of October 1745. His works included The Battle of the Books in 1704, Tale of a Tub in 1704, and Gulliver's Travels in 1726. Essays, verses, pamphlets, etc., largely satirical. Yeah, I'm just reading a section of the book. I'm just reading the little excerpt about information about Jonathan Swift. Hero 5th thought that I was getting ahead of the story. He can't tell the difference between the dry information and the story. Anyways, largely satirical, and the famous journal to Stella, written in 1710 and 1711. I could read a little bit of the introduction. The political career of Jonathan Swift began in the first year of the 18th century and closed 40 years after. It stretched across the reign of Queen Anne, that of George I, and a portion of that of George II, but its highest activity and influence were reached during the later years of the Queen's life. The political questions around which the fierce contests in those years raged were few in number, but of commanding importance. The revolution of 1688 had recently occurred. The long-suffering English people, unable to endure the wicked folly of James II, so frightened that unworthy monarch that he had fled from the country, whereupon it was declared that his throne was vacant and his successor was chosen. All the persons who had fallen from place and dignity with the king, all that large number whose unreasoning and erring sympathies were given to the expelled house of the Stuart, or who, in course of years, were offended by the coldness and repulsive sternness of Williams, all of these were eager for restoration. Such persons were almost invariably Tories. The Whigs had promoted the Revolution, they now upheld its doctrines, and the king whom they had set up to give effect to these doctrines. William brought with him to the English throne a deep and inextinguishable hatred to Louis XIV, a deep... Oh, okay, back to the normal reading. Okay, so the Emperor holds a stick in his hands, both ends parallel to the horizon, while the candidates advancing one by one sometimes leap over the stick, sometimes creep under it, backwards and forwards several times, according as the stick is advanced or depressed. Sometimes the Emperor holds one end of the stick, and his first minister the other. Sometimes the minister has it entirely to himself. Whoever performs his part with most agility and holds out the longest in leaping and creeping is rewarded with the blue-colored silk. The red is given to the next, and the green to the third, which they all wear girt twice round about the middle. And you see few great persons about the court who are not adorned with one of these girdles. The horses of the army and those of the royal stables, having been daily led before me, were no longer shy, but would come up to my very feet without starting. The riders would leap them over my hand as I held it on the ground, and one of the Emperor's huntsmen upon a large courser took my foot, shoe and all, which was indeed a prodigious leap. I had the good fortune to divert the Emperor one day after a very extraordinary manner. I desired he would order several sticks of 2 feet high and the thickness of an ordinary cane to be brought me, whereupon his Majesty commanded the master of his woods to give directions accordingly, and the next morning 6 woodsmen arrived with as many carriages drawn by 8 horses to each. I took 9 of these sticks, and fixing them firmly in the ground in a quadrangular figure, 2 feet and a half square, I took 4 other sticks and tied them parallel at each corner about 2 feet from the ground. I then fastened my handkerchief to the 9 sticks that stood erect and extended it on all sides till it was as tight as the top of a drum, and the 4 parallel sticks rising about 5 inches higher than the handkerchief served as ledges on each side. When I had finished my work, I desired the Emperor to let a troop of his best horses, 24 in number, come and exercise upon this plain. His Majesty approved of the proposal, and I took them up, one by one, in my hands, readily mounted and armed, with the proper officers to exercise them. As soon as they got into order, they diverted into 2 parties, performed mock skirmishes, discharged blunt arrows, drew their swords, fled and pursued, attacked and retired, and in short discovered the best military discipline I ever beheld. The parallel sticks secured them and their horses from falling over the stage, and the Emperor was so much delighted that he ordered this entertainment to be repeated several days, and once was pleased to be lifted up and give the word of command, and with great difficulty persuaded even the Empress herself to let me hold her in her close chair within 2 yards of the stage, when she was able to take a full view of the whole performance. It was my good fortune that no ill accident happened in these entertainments. Only once a fiery horse that belonged to one of the captains, pawing with his hoof, struck a hole in my handkerchief, and his foot slipping, he overturned his rider and himself, but I immediately relieved them both, and covering the hole with one hand, I set down the troop with the other, in the same manner as I took them up. The horse that fell was strained in the left shoulder, but the rider got no hurt, and I repaired my handkerchief as well as I could. However, I would not trust the strength of it with any more in such dangerous enterprises. About 2 or 3 days before I was set at liberty, as I was entertaining the court with this kind of feats, there arrived in express to inform me his majesty that some of his subjects, riding near the place where I was first taken up, had seen a great black substance lying on the ground, very oddly shaped, extending its edges round as wide as his majesty's bedchamber, and rising up in the middle as high as a man. That it was no living creature, as they had first apprehended, for it lay on the grass without motion, and some of them had walked round it several times, that by mounting upon each other's shoulders they had got up to the top, which was flat and even, and stamped upon it they found that it was hollow within, that they humbly conceived that it might be something belonging to the man-mountain, and if his majesty pleased, they would undertake to bring it with only 5 horses. I presently knew what they meant, and was glad at heart to receive this intelligence. It seemed upon my reaching the shore after our shipwreck, I was in such confusion that before I came to the place where I went to sleep, my hat, which I had fastened with a string to my head while I was rowing, and had stuck on all the time I was swimming, fell off after I came to land. The string, as I conjecture, breaking by some accident, which I never observed, but thought my hat had been lost at sea. I entreated his Imperial Majesty to give orders it might be brought to me as soon as possible, describing to him the use and nature of it. And the next day the wagoners arrived with it, but not in very good condition. They had bored 2 holes in the brim with 1.5 inches of the edge, and fastened 2 hooks in the holes. These hooks were tied by a long cord to the harness, and thus my hat was dragged along for about half an English mile. But the ground in that country being extremely smooth and level, it received less damage than I expected. 2 days after this adventure, the Emperor, having ordered that part of his army which quarters in and about the metropolis to be in readiness, took a fancy of diverting himself in a very singular manner. He desired I would stand like a colossus, with my legs as far asunder as I conveniently could. He then commanded his general, who was an old experienced leader and a great patron of mine, to draw up the troops in close order and march them under me, the foot by 24 abreast, and the horse by 16, with drums beating, colours flying, and pikes advanced. This body consisted of 3,000 foot and 1,000 horse. His Majesty gave orders upon pain of death that every soldier in his march should observe the strictest propriety. I had sent so many memorials and petitions for my liberty that His Majesty at length mentioned the matter first in the cabinet and then in full council, where it was opposed by none except Skyresh Bolgalam, who was pleased without any provocation to be my mortal enemy. But it was carried against him by the whole board and confirmed by the Emperor. That minister was Galbet, or admiral of the realm, very much in his master's confidence, and a person well versed in affairs, but of a morose and sour complexion. However, he was at length persuaded to comply, but prevailed that the articles and conditions upon which I should be set free, and to which I must swear, should be drawn up by himself. These articles were brought to me by Skyresh Bolgolam in person, attended by 2 under-secretaries and several persons of distinction. After they were read, I was demanded to swear to the performance of them, first in the manner of my own country, and afterwards in the method prescribed by their laws, which was to hold my right foot in my left hand, and to place the middle finger of my right hand on the crown of my head, and my thumb on the tip of my right ear. But because the reader may be curious to have some idea of the style of manner of expression particular to that people, as well as to know the articles upon which I recovered my liberty, I have made a translation of the whole instrument, word for word as near as I was able, which I here offered to the public. Golbasto Momarem Evlem. Please. Okay, not the whole thing is that. I don't want to read gibberish for 3 chapters. Evlem Gerdilo Shefin Muli Uli Gu. Most mightily Emperor of Lilliput, delight and terror of the universe, whose dominions extend 5,000 blustrugs, about 12 miles in circumference, to the extremities of the globe, monarch of all monarchs, taller than the sons of men, whose feet press down to the center, and whose head strikes against the sun, at whose nod the princes of the earth shake their knees. Pleasant as the spring, comfortable as the summer, fruitful as autumn, dreadful as the winter, His most sublime Majesty proposes to the man-mountain lately arrived at our celestial dominions the following articles, which by solemn oath he shall be obliged to perform. The first, the Man Mountain shall not depart from our dominions without our license under our great seal. The second, he shall not presume to come into our metropolis without our express order, at which the inhabitants shall have 2 hours' warning to keep within doors. The third, the said Man Mountain shall confine his walks to our principal high roads, and not offer to walk or lie down in a meadow or field of corn. The fourth, as he walks the said roads, he shall take the utmost care not to trample upon the bodies of any of our loving subjects, their horses or carriages, nor take any of our subjects into his hands without their own consent. The fifth, if an express requires extraordinary dispatch, the Man Mountain shall be obliged to carry in his pocket the messenger and horse of 6 days' journey once in every moon, and return that the said messenger back, if so required, safe to our imperial presence. The sixth, he shall be our ally against our enemies in the island of Blephicus. Asterix. Whatever. Blephicus is France, Lilliput is England. France often spoke of invading England, and England was then, as she so often been since, considerably alarmed by the threat. Anyways, the island of Blephicus, and do his utmost to destroy their fleet, which is now preparing to invade us. The seventh, that the said Man Mountain shall at his time of leisure be aiding and assisting to our workmen in helping to raise certain great stones towards covering the walls of the principal park and other our royal buildings. The eighth, that the said Man Mountain shall, in 2 moons' time, deliver in an exact survey of the circumference of our dominions by a computation of his own paces round the coast. Lastly, that upon his solemn oath to observe all the above articles, the said Man Mountain shall have a daily allowance of meat and drink sufficient for the support of 1,728 of our subjects, with free access to our royal person and other marks of our favor, given at our palace at Belfaborac, the 12th day of the 91st moon of our reign. I swore and subscribed to these articles with great cheerfulness and consent, although some of them were not so honourable as I could have wished, which was proceeded wholly from the malice of Skyrish Bulgaram, the High Admiral, whereupon my chains were immediately unlocked, and I was at full liberty. The Emperor himself in person did me the honour to be by at the whole ceremony. I made my acknowledgments by prostrating myself at his Majesty's feet, but he commanded me to rise, and after many gracious expressions, which, to avoid the censure of vanity, I shall not repeat, he added that he hoped I should prove a useful servant, and well deserve all the favours he had already conferred upon me, and might do in the future. The reader may please to observe that, in the last article of the recovery of my liberty, the Emperor stipulates to allow me a quantity of meat and drink sufficient for the support of 1,728 Lilliputians. Some time after, asking a friend at court how they came to fix on that determinate number, he told me that his Majesty's mathematicians, having taken the height of my body by the help of a quadrant, and finding it to exceed theirs in the proportion of 12 to 1, they concluded from the similarities of their bodies that mine must contain at least 1,728 of theirs, and consequently would require as much food as was necessary to support that number of Lilliputans, by which the reader may conceive an idea of the ingenuity of this people, as well as the prudent and exact economy of so great a prince. Chapter 4. Mildeno, the metropolis of Lilliput, described, together with the Emperor's palace, a conversation between the author and the principal secretary concerning the affairs of that empire. The author offers to serve the Emperor in his wars. The first request I made after I had obtained my liberty was that I might have license to see Mildeno. Yes. Mildendo, there we go. The metropolis, which the Emperor easily granted me, but with a special charge to do no hurt either to the inhabitants or their houses. The people had notice, by proclamation of my design, to visit the town. The wall which encompassed it is 2 feet high and 2.5 high. Is 2 feet and a half high, sorry. and at least 11 inches broad, so that a coach and horse may be driven very safely round it, and it is flanked with strong towers at 10 feet distance. Excuse me. I stepped over the great western gate and passed very gently and sidling through the two principal streets, only in my short waistcoat, for fear of damaging the roofs and eaves of the houses with the skirts of my coat. I walked with the utmost circumspection to avoid treading on any stragglers who might remain in the streets, although the orders were very strict that all people should keep in their homes at their own peril. The garret windows and tops of houses were so crowded with spectators that I thought in all my travels I had not seen a more populous place. The city is an exact square, each side of the walls being 500 feet long. The two great streets, which run across and divide into 4 quadrants, are 5 feet wide. The lanes and alleys, which I could not enter but only viewed them as I passed, are from 20 to 18 inches. The town is capable of holding 500,000 souls. The houses are from 3 to 5 stories. The shops and markets well provided. The Emperor's palace is in the center of the city, where the two great streets meet. It is enclosed by a wall of 2 feet high and 20 feet distance from the building. I had His Majesty's permission to step over this wall, and the space being so wide between that and the palace, I could easily view it on every side. The outwards court is a square of 40 feet and includes 2 other courts. In the innermost are the royal apartments, which I was very desirous to see, but found it extremely difficult, for the great gates from one square into another were about 18 inches high and 7 inches wide. Now the buildings of the outer court were at least 5 feet high, and it was impossible for me to stride over them without infinite damage to the pile, though the walls were strongly built in hewn stone and 4 inches thick. At the same time, the Emperor had a great desire that I should see the magnificence of his palace, but this I was not able to do till 3 days after, which I spent in cutting down with my knife some of the largest trees in the royal park, about 400 yards distant from the city. Of these trees I made 2 stools, each about 3 feet high and strong enough to bear my weight. The people having received notice a second time, I went again through the city to the palace with my 2 stools in my hands. When I came to the side of the outer court, I stood upon one stool and took the other in my hand. This I lifted over the roof and gently set it down on the space between the first and second court, which was 8 feet wide. I then stepped over the building very conveniently from one stool to the other, and drew up the first after me and with a hooked stick. By this contrivance, I got into the inner court, and lying down upon my side, I applied my face to the windows of the middle stories, which were left open on purpose, and discovered the most splendid apartments that could be imagined. There I saw the Empress and the young princes in their several lodgings, with their chief attendants about them. His Imperial Majesty was pleased to smile very graciously upon me, and gave me out of the window her hand to kiss. But I shall not anticipate the reader with further descriptions of this kind, because I reserve them for a greater work, which is now almost ready for the press, containing a general description of this empire, from its first erection through a long series of princes, with a particular account of their wars and politics, laws, learnings, and religion, their plants and animals, their particular manners and customs, with other matters very curious and useful. My chief design at present being only to relate such events and transactions as happened to the public or to myself during a residence of about 9 months in that empire. One morning, about a fortnight after I had obtained my liberty, Well-Dressel, a principal secretary, as they style him, for private affairs, came to my house, attended only by one servant. He ordered his coach to wait at a distance, and I desired I would give him an hour's audience, which I readily consented to, on account of his quality and personal merits, as well as of many good offices he had done me during my solicitations. At court. I need a drink. During my solicitations at court. I offered to lie down that he might the more conveniently reach my ear, but he chose rather to let me hold him in my hand during our conversation. He began with compliments on my liberty, saying he might pretend to some merit in it, but however added that if it had not been for the present situation of things at court, perhaps I might not have obtained it so soon, for, said he, As flourishing a condition as we might appear to be into foreigners, we labor under two mighty evils, a violent faction at home, and the danger of an invasion by a most potent enemy from abroad. As to the first, you are to understand that for about 70 moons past, there have been two struggling parties in this empire, under the names Tramexen and Slamexen. Tramexen and Slamexen, from the high and low heels of their shoes, by which they distinguish themselves. It is alleged, indeed, that the high heels are most agreeable to our ancient constitution, but however this be, His Majesty is determined to make use only of low heels in the administration of the government, and all officers are in the gift of the crown, as you cannot but observe, and particularly that His Majesty's imperial heels are lower by at least a drur than any of his court. Drur is a measure about 14th part of an inch. The animosities between these two parties run so high that they will neither eat nor drink nor talk with each other. We compute the Tramexens, or high heels, to exceed us in number, but the power is wholly on our side. We apprehend His Imperial Highness, the heir to the crown, to have some tendency towards the high heels. At least we can plainly discover that one of his heels is higher than the other, which gives him a hobble in his gait. Now, in the midst of these intestine disquiets, we are threatened with an invasion from the Isle of I hate these names. Blefuscu, which is the other great empire of the universe, almost as large and powerful as this of His Majesty. For as to what we have heard you affirm, that there are other kingdoms and states in the world inhabited by human creatures as large as yourself, our philosophers are in much doubt, and would rather conjecture that you dropped from the moon or one of the stars, because it is certain that 100 mortals of your bulk would in short time destroy all the fruits and cattle of His Majesty's dominions. Besides, our histories of 6,000 moons make no mention of any other region than the two great empires of Lilliput and Blefuscu. Blefuscu. Can do this. Which two mighty powers have, as I was going to tell you, been engaged in a most obstinate war for 36 moons past. It began upon the following occasion. It is allowed on all hands that the primitive mode of breaking eggs before we eat them was upon the larger end, but His Majesty's grandfather, while he was a boy, going to eat an egg and breaking it accordingly to the ancient practice, happened to cut one of his fingers, whereupon the emperor, his father, published an edict commanding all his subjects, upon great penalties, to break the smaller end of their eggs. The people so highly represented this law that our histories tell us there have been 6 rebellions raised on that account, wherein one emperor lost his life and another his crown. These civil commotions were constantly formed by the monarchs of Blefuscu, and when they were quelled, the exiles always fled for refuge to that empire. It is computed that 11,000 persons have at several times suffered death rather than submit to break their eggs at the smaller end. Many hundred large volumes have been published upon this controversy, but the books of the big Endians have been long forbidden, and the whole party rendered incapable by law of holding employments. During the course of these troubles, the emperors of Blefuscu did frequently expostulate by their ambassadors and accusing us of making a schism in religion by offering against a fundamental doctrine of our great prophet Lustrog in the 44th chapter of the Blundacral, which is their Alcoran. This, however, is thought to be a mere the book has missing. It's missing a dot. A mere strain upon the text, for the words are these, that all true believers break their eggs at the convenient end. And which is the convenient end seems, in my humble opinion, to be left to every man's conscience, or at least in the power of the chief magistrate to determine. Now, the big Endians, exiles, have found so much credit in the Emperor of Blefuscu's court, and so much private assistance and encouragement from their private party here at home, that a bloody war has been carried on between the two empires for 36 moons, with varied success, during which time we have lost 40 capital ships, a much greater number of smaller vessels, together with 30,000 of our best seamen and soldiers, and the damage received by the enemy is reckoned to be somewhat greater than ours. However, they have now equipped a numerous fleet, and are just preparing to make a descent upon us, and His Imperial Majesty, placing great confidence in your valor and strength, has commanded me to lay this account of his affairs before you. I desired the secretary to present my humble duty to the Emperor, and to let him know that I thought it would not become me, who was a foreigner, to interfere with parties, but I was ready with the hazard of my life to defend his person and state against all invaders. Wrist crack. This book is too tiny. It's a little tiny book. Chapter 5. The author, by an extraordinary stratagem, prevents an invasion. A high title of honor is conferred upon him. Ambassadors arrive from the Emperor of Blefuscu and sue for peace. The Empire of Blefuscu is an island situated to the northeast of Lilliput, from which it is parted only by a channel of 800 yards wide. I had not yet seen it, and upon this notice of an intended invasion, I avoided appearing on that side of the coast, for fear of being discovered by some of the enemy's ships, who had received no intelligence of me. All intercourse between the two empires having been strictly forbidden during the war, upon pain of death, and an embargo laid by our emperor upon all vessels whatsoever. I communicated to His Majesty a project I had formed of seizing the enemy's whole fleet, which, as our scouts assured us, lay at anchor in the harbor, ready to sail with the first fair wind. I consulted the most experienced seamen upon the depths of the channel, which they often plumbed, who told me that in the middle of the high water it was 70 glumgluffs deep, which is about 6 feet of European measure, and the rest of it 50 glumgluffs at most. I walked towards the northeast coast, over against Blefuscu, where, lying down behind a hillock, I took out my small perspective glass and viewed the enemy's fleet at anchor, consisting of about 50 men of war and a great number of transports. I then came back to my house and gave orders, for which I have a warrant, for a great quantity of the strongest cable and bars of iron. The cable was about as thick as pack thread, and the bars of length and size of knitting needle. I trebled the cable to make it stronger, and for the same reason I twisted 3 of the iron bars together, bending the extremities into a hook. Having thus fixed 50 hooks to as many cables, I went back to the northeast coast, and putting off my coat, shoes, and stockings, walked into the sea in my leathern jerkin, about half an hour before high water. I waded with what haste I could, and swam in the middle about 30 yards till I felt ground. I arrived at the fleet in less than half an hour. The enemy were so frightened when they saw me that they leapt out of their ships and swam to shore, where they could not be fewer than 30,000 souls. I then took my tackling and fastened a hook to the whole of the prow of each. I tied all the cords together at the end. While I was thus employed, the enemy discharged several thousand arrows, many of which struck in my hands and face, and, besides the excessive smart, gave me much disturbance in my work. My greatest apprehension was for mine eyes, which I should have infallibly lost if I had not suddenly thought of an expedient. I kept among other little necessities a pair of spectacles in a private pocket, as he mentioned earlier. Lost my place. Which, as I observed before, had escaped the Emperor's searchers. These I took out and fastened as strongly as I could upon my nose, and thus armed, went on boldly with my work, in spite of the enemy arrows, many of which struck against the glasses of my spectacles, but without any other effect than a little to decompose them. I had now fastened all the hooks, and taking the knot in my hand, began to pull, but not a ship would stir, for they were all too fast held by their anchors, so that the boldest part of my enterprise remained. I therefore let go the cord, and leaving the hooks fixed to the ships, I resolutely cut with my knife the cables that fastened the anchors, receiving about 200 shots in my face and hands. Then I took up the knotted end of the cables to which my hooks were tied, and with the greatest ease drew 50 of the enemy's largest men of war after me. The Blefuscudians, I don't know, who had not the least imagination of what I intended, were at first confounded with astonishment. They had seen me cut the cables and thought my design was only to let the ships run adrift or fall foul of each other. But when they perceived the whole fleet moving in order and saw me pulling at the end, they set up such a scream of grief and despair as it almost impossible to describe or conceive. When I had got out of danger, I stopped a while to pick out the arrows that stuck in my hands and face, and rubbed on some of the same ointment that was given me on my first arrival, as I have formerly mentioned. I then took off my spectacles, and waiting about an hour till the tide was a little fallen, I waded through the middle with my cargo and arrived safe at the royal port of Lilliput. The emperor and his whole court stood on the shore, expecting the issue of this great adventure. They saw the ships move forwards in a large half-moon, but could not discern me, who was up to my breasts in water. When I advanced to the middle of the channel, they were yet in pain, because I was under water to my neck. Asterisk. Swift has considered with great care the dimensions which he assigns to all objects in Lilliput, so that they may harmonize with those of the inhabitants. Ordinarily, the scale is very strictly adhered to, but here, Professor de Morgan points out, he has overestimated the power of his hero. The feat which Gulliver performs is the equivalent of drawing 1/35th part of an ordinary ship of war across a channel of 800 yards by a man wading neck-deep in water, a thing wholly impossible. End of asterisk. Oh my, the fictitious story is impossible. The Emperor concluded me to be drowned, and the enemy's fleet was approaching in a hostile manner. He was soon eased of his fears, for the channel growing shallower every step I made, I came to a short time within hearing, and holding up the end of the cable by which the fleet was fastened, I cried out in a loud voice, "Long live the most puissant king of Lilliput!" This great prince received me at my landing with all possible... I found a word I don't know. I'm gonna look it up. I think it's economums, but that's really weird sounding. Encomiums. Encomiums? I wish they had pronunciation that wasn't AI. Let's see. Listen to this. Encomium. A speech or piece of writing that praises someone or something highly. Encomiums. And created me a Nardak upon the spot, which is the highest title of honor among them. His Majesty desired I would take some other opportunity of bringing all the rest of his enemy's ships into his ports, and so immeasurable is the ambition of the princes that he seemed to think of nothing less than reducing the whole empire of Blefuscu into a province and governing it by a viceroy, of destroying the big Indians exiles and compelling that people to break the smaller end of their eggs, by which he would remain the sole monarch of the whole world. Oh, excuse me. But I endeavored to divert him from this design by many arguments drawn from the topics of policy as well as justice, and I plainly protested that I would never be an instrument of bringing a free and brave people into slavery. And when the matter was debated in council, the wisest part of the ministry were of my opinion. This open, bold declaration of mine was so opposite to the schemes and politics of his Imperial Majesty that he could never forgive me. He mentioned it in a very artful manner at council, where I was told that some of the wisest appeared, at least by their silence, to be of my opinion, but others, who were my enemies, could not forbear some expression by which a side wind reflected on me. And from this time began an intrigue between his Majesty and a junto of ministers maliciously bent against me, which broke out in less than 2 months, and had like to have ended in my utter destruction. Of so little weight are the greatest services to princes when put into the balance with a refusal to gratify their passions. About 3 weeks after this exploit, there arrived a solemn embassy from Blefuscu with humble offers of peace, with which was soon concluded upon conditions very advantageous to our emperor, wherewith I shall not trouble the reader. There were 6 ambassadors, with a train of about 500 persons, and their entry was very magnificent, suitable to the grandeur of their master and the importance of their business. When their tree was finished, wherein I did them several good offices by credit I now had, or at least appeared to have had at court, their excellencies, who were privately told how much I had been their friend, made me a visit in form. They began with many compliments upon my valor and generosity, invited me to that kingdom in the emperor their majesty's name, and desired me to show them some proofs of my prodigious strength, of which they had heard so many wonders, wherein I readily obliged them, but shall not trouble the reader with the particulars. When I had for some time entertained their excellencies, to their infinite satisfaction and surprise, I desired they would do me an honour to present my most humble respects to the emperor their master, the renown of whose virtues are so justly filled the whole world with admiration, and whose royal person I resolved to attend before I returned to my own country. Accordingly, the next time I had the honour to see the emperor, I desired his general license to wait on the Blefuscudian monarch, which he was pleased to grant me, as I could perceive in a very cold manner, but not guess the reason till I had whispered from a certain person that Flimnap and Bolgolam had represented in my intercourse with those 2 ambassadors as a mark of disaffection from which I was sure my heart was wholly free. What? Till I had a whisper from a certain person that Flimnap and Bolgolam had represented my intercourse with those 2 ambassadors as a mark of dissatisfaction, from which I am sure my heart was wholly free, and this was the first time I began to conceive some imperfect idea of courts and ministers. It is to be observed that these ambassadors spoke to me by an interpreter, the language of both empires differing as much from each other as any 2 in Europe, and each nation priding itself upon the antiquity, beauty, and energy of their own tongue, with an avowed contempt of that of their neighbour. Yet our emperor, standing upon the advantage he had got by the seizure of their fleet, obliged them to deliver their credentials and make their speech in the Lilliputian tongue. And it must be confessed that from the great intercourse of trade and commerce between both realms, from the continual reception of exiles, which is mutual among them, and from the custom in each empire to send their young nobility and richer gentry to the other in order to polish themselves by seeing the world and understanding men and manners, there are few persons of distinction, or merchants or seamen who dwell in the maritime parts. The book has a wrinkle. Or seamen who dwell in the maritime parts, but what can hold conversations in both tongues. As I found some weeks after, when I went to pay my respects to the emperor in Blefuscu, which, in the midst of a great misfortunes, through the malice of my enemies, proved a very happy adventure to me, and I shall relate it in its proper place. Hero 5th. What are the ads at? Okay. Chapter 6. The inhabitants of Lilliput, their learning, laws, and customs, the manner of educating their children, the author's way of living in that country, his vindication of a great lady. Although I intend to leave the description of this empire to a particular treatise, yet, in the meantime, I am content to gratify the curious reader with some general ideas. As the common size of the natives is somewhat under 6 inches high, so there is an exact proportion in all other animals, as well as plants and trees. For instance, the tallest horses and oxen are between 4 and 5 inches in height. The sheep are 1.5 inches, more or less. Their geese about the bigness of a sparrow, and so the several gradations downwards, till you come to the smallest, which to my sight were almost invisible. But nature has adapted the eyes of the Lilliputans to all objects proper for their view. They see with great exactness, but at no great distance, and to show the sharpness of their sight towards objects that are near, I have been much pleased with observing a cook pulling a lark which was not as large as the common fly, and a young girl threading an invisible needle with an invisible silk. Their tallest trees are about 7 feet high. I mean some of those in the great royal park, the tops whereof I could but just reach with my fist clenched. The other vegetables are in the same proportion, but this I leave to the reader's imagination. I shall say but little at present of their learning, which for many ages has flourished in all of its branches among them, but their manner of writing is very peculiar, being neither from the left to the right, like the Europeans, nor from the right to the left, like the Arabians, nor from up to down, like the Chinese, but aslant, from one corner of the paper to the other, like ladies in England. What does that mean? There are some laws and customs in this empire very peculiar, and if they were not so directly contrary to those of my own dear country, I should be tempted to say a little in their justification. It is only to be wished that they were as well It is only to be wished that they were as well executed. The first I shall mention relates to informers. All crimes against the state are punished here with the utmost severity, but if the person accused makes his innocence plainly to appear upon his trial, the accuser is immediately put to an ignominious. I want to say ignominious, but that doesn't. There's too many extra words. Ignominious death. What does that mean? Another weird word. I'm looking it up. Deserving or causing public disgrace or shame. Gotta turn this up so I can hear. I was right. Ignominious. Weird word. Deserving or causing public disgrace or shame. Alrighty. Death. Where was that? There it is. Ignominious death. So a shameful and public death. We need somebody. Band hero. And smack. Banhammer. Smoke. Oops. Glass of water. Yeet. Begone, thought. And out of his goods or lands, the innocent person is quadruply recompensed for the loss of his time, for the danger he underwent, for the hardship of his imprisonment, and for all the charges he has been at making his defense. Or, if that fund is insufficient, it is largely supplied by the crown. The emperor also confers on him some public mark of his favor, and proclamation of his innocence is made throughout the whole city. They look upon fraud as a greater crime than theft, and therefore seldom fail to punish it with death. For they allege that care and vigilance, with a very common understanding, may preserve a man's goods from thieves, but honesty has no fence against superior cunning, and since it is necessary that there should be a perpetual intercourse of buying and selling and dealing upon credit, where fraud is permitted and connived at, or has no law to punish it, the honest dealer is always undone, and the knave gets the advantage. I remember when I was once interceding with the king for a criminal who was wronged his master of a great sum of money, which he had received by order and ran away with, and happened to tell his majesty by way of extenuation that it was only a breach of trust. The emperor thought it monstrous in me to have a defense the greatest aggravation of the crime, and truly I had little to say in return, further than the common answer that different nations had different customs, for I confess I was heartily ashamed. Although we usually call reward and punishment the two hinges upon which all government turns, yet I could never observe this maximum to be put in practice by any nation except that of Lilliput. Whoever can there bring sufficient proof that he has strictly observed the laws of his country for 73 moons has a claim to certain privileges according to his quality or condition in life, with a proportionate sum of money out of a fund appropriate for that use. He likewise acquires the title of Snilpal, or legal, which is added to his name, but does not descend to his posterity. And these people thought it a prodigious defect of policy among us, when I told them that our laws were enforced only by penalties without any mention of reward. It is upon these accounts that the image of justice in their courts of judicature, judicature is formed with 6 eyes, 2 before as many behind, and on each side 1, to signify its circumspection. With a bag of gold open to her right hand, with a sword sheathed in her left, to show she is more disposed to reward than to punish. In choosing persons for all employments, they have more regard to good morals than to great abilities, for since government is necessary to mankind, they believe that common size of human understanding is fitted to some station or another, and that Providence never intends to make the management of public affairs a mystery to be comprehended only by a few persons of sublime genius, of which there are seldom 3 born in an age. But they suppose truth, justice, temperance, and the like to be in every man's power, the practice of which virtues, assisted by experience and good intention, would qualify any man for the service of his country, except whereas a course of study is required. But they thought that want of moral virtues was so far from being supplied by superior endowments of the mind, that employment could never be put on such dangerous hands as those of persons so qualified, and at least that the mistakes committed by ignorance in a virtuous disposition would never be such fatal consequences to the public weal as the practices of a man whose inclinations led him to be corrupt, and who had great abilities to manage, multiply, and defend his corruptions. Ooh. Did you follow any of that, Cathis? Essentially, he's saying that in Lilliput, they put moral standing higher than ability, because they figure that even somebody who is ignorant and non-intelligent, if they have good moral standing, could make fewer mistakes and damage to a country than somebody who is highly skilled and smart and conniving enough to circumvent laws. Anyways. Carrie's like, I appreciate that. In like manner, no wonder it's like, I'm surprised Gulliver's Travels isn't banned yet. Oh, my wrist is sore. In like manner, the disbelief of a divine providence renders a man incapable of holding any public station. For since kings avow themselves to the deputies of providence, the Lilliputians think nothing can be more absurd than for a prince to employ such men as disown the authority under which he acts. In relating these and the following laws, I would only be understood to mean the original institutions, and not the most scandalous corruptions, into which these people have fallen by the degenerate nature of man. For, as to the infamous practice of acquiring great employments by dancing on the ropes, or badges of favor by distinction by leaping over sticks and creeping under them, the reader is to observe that they were first introduced by the grandfather of the emperor now reigning, and grew to the present height by the gradual increase of party and faction. I feel like I got a burp, but it's not coming out. Pardon me. Ingratitude is among them a capital crime, as we read it to have been in some other countries, for they reason thus, that whoever makes ill return to his benefactor must needs be a common enemy to the rest of mankind, from whom he has received no obligation, and therefore such a man is not fit to live. What's wrong with Jules? Well, like, I know what's wrong with Jules Verne. But I've said I'm surprised Gulliver isn't banned, because, like, it's talking about, it's very critical of, like, people and governance. But, why you bring up Jules? I know why Jules, I'm not reading Jules Verne. Like, I could read it, but, like, I'd have to skip a lot of stuff. I'd have to, yeah, I'd have to, like, read a page and be like, okay, we are allowed to read this one. Just silence while I read a paragraph, and we're good. It's, honestly, I might do that. I might read and then read it, but skipping the bad parts. Because Jules Verne puts me to sleep when I read it. I was like, and maybe reading it on here will get me through it. Their notions relating to the duties of parents and children differ extremely from ours. They think that the tenderness of parents towards their young proceeds from natural principle, for which reason for which reason they will never allow that a child is under any obligation to his father or his mother for bringing him into the world, which, considering the miseries of human life, was neither a benefit in itself nor intended so by his parents. Oh, that's interesting. Upon these and the like reasonings, their opinions is that parents are the last of all others to be trusted with the education of their own children, and therefore they have in every town public nurseries, where all parents except cottagers and laborers are obliged to send their infants of both sexes to be reared and educated when they come of age of 20 moons, at which time they are supposed to have some rudiments of docility. Carrie laughs at that one. I mean, I think taking the children from the parents and raising them in group homes might be a bit excessive, but I do agree that the sentiments that the child is under no obligations to the parents for bringing them into the world, especially considering the miseries of human life, and it's not exactly a benefit. It's like, I brought you into this world, and I want to say, not thank you for that. Have you seen the world? Anyways, these schools are of several kinds, suited to different qualities in both sexes. They have certain professors, well skilled in preparing children for such a condition of life as befits the rank of their parents, and their own that's a weird word. I found another weird word I gotta look up. It makes me think capricious, but it's spelt weirdly. Where am I? Caprices. A sudden, unaccountable change of mood or behavior. It might be capricious. Caprice. So caprices. Do I say the plural of this? I guess I'll say caprices. Seems right. Whatever. We continue. Life as benefits the rank of their parents and their own caprices as well as inclinations. I shall first say something of the male nurseries and then of the female. The nurseries for males of noble or eminent birth are provided with grave and learned professors and their several deputies. The clothes and foods of the children are plain and simple. They are bred up in the principles of honor, justice, courage, modesty, clemency, religion, and love of their country. They are always employed in some business, except in the times of eating and sleeping, which are very short, and 2 hours for diversions, consisting of bodily exercises. They are dressed by men till 4 years of age, and then are obliged to dress themselves, although their quality be ever so great, and the women attendants, who are aged proportionably to ours at 50, perform only the most menial offices. They are never suffered to converse with servants, but go together in small or greater numbers to take their diversions, and always in the presence of a professor or one of his deputies, whereby they avoid those early bad impressions of folly and vice to which our children are subject. Their parents are suffered to see them only twice a year. The visit is to last but an hour. They are allowed to kiss the child at meeting and parting. But a professor who always stands by on those occasions will not suffer them to whisper, or use any fondling expressions, or bring any presents or toys, sweetmeats, and the like. The pension for each family for the education and entertainment of a child upon failure of due payment is levied by the emperor's offices. The nurseries for children of ordinary gentlemen, merchants, traders, and handicrafts are managed proportionally after the same manner. Only those designed for trades are put out apprentices at 11 years old, whereas those of persons of quality continue in their exercises till 15, which answers to 21 with us. But the confinement is generally lessened for the last 3 years. In the female nurseries, the young girls of quality are educated much like the males, only they are dressed by orderly servants of their own sex, but always in the presence of a professor or deputy till they come to dress themselves, which is at 5 years old. And if it be found that these nurses ever presume to entertain the girls with frightful or foolish stories, or the common follies practiced by chambermaids among us, they are publicly whipped thrice about the city, imprisoned for a year, and banished for life to the most desolate part of the country. Okay. Thus the young ladies there are as much ashamed of being cowards and fools as the men, and despise all personal ornaments beyond decency and cleanliness. Neither did I perceive any difference in their education made by the difference of sex, only that the exercise of the females were not altogether so robust, and that some rules were given them relating to domestic life, and a smaller compass of learning was enjoyed them. For their maxim is, that among people of quality a wife should always be reasonable and agreeable companion, because she cannot always be young. Okay. When the girls are 12 years old, which among them is the marriageable age, their parents or guardians take them home, with great expressions of gratitude to the professors, and seldom without the tears of the young lady and her companions. Yeah, I agree. I mean, different country, I guess. In the nurseries of females of the meaner sort, the children are instructed in all kinds of work proper for their sex and their several degrees. Those intended for apprentices are dismissed at 7 years old, the rest are kept to 11. The meaner families who have children at their nurseries are obliged, besides their annual pension, which is as low as possible, to return to the steward of the nursery a small monthly share of their gettings to be portioned for the child, and therefore all parents are limited in their expenses by the law. For the Lilliputians think nothing can be more unjust than for people in subservience to their own appetites to bring children into the world and leave the burden of supporting them on the public. Right, the times. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, considering he's vouching for females and males to both be given the same education, his era, that's very progressive. Oh. So I guess, yay. Oh, add in progress. Yay, we can discuss sexism and the matriarchy. Woo. And he is mentioning that besides the what's the word? The somewhat extra curriculum for the females, he did mention that the girls also can end up being apprenticeships and such in general labor, so I figure he's assuming they would also get regular jobs. Oh. I wonder, like, the whole thing about being, like, the kids taken from the parents and not being, like, influenced, and the kids not allowed to be little, I guess he's assuming demons, by being monitored all the time and always kept busy. I don't know. Is Lilliput his ideal situation? Because little munchkins. Uh, my gosh, it's almost 12. I think, see about getting through this last little bit. It's a couple more pages. So we'll get to chapter 7. And then we'll call it for the night. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pages. We can do that. That would leave us looking at about, let's see, it's about a quarter of the way through the book. I mean, I could read Jules Verne, and then I might have to have some asterisks about the apologies, like, I don't know. I'm on the fence. I'd love to read The Alchemist. I really like that book. I also like the way that the cadence of the sentence structure is. Like, you can definitely get the author's phrasing vibes when you read a book. How it kind of the ebb and flow of the sentence structure. And I really like The Alchemists. It almost feels like reading poetry, to me at least. It's pleasant. Oh, sorry, zoning out. Uh, do, 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 do. There we go. For the Lilliputians think nothing can be more unjust than for people in subservience to their own appetites to bring children into the world and leave the burden of supporting them on the public. As to persons of quality, they give security to appropriate a certain sum for each child, suitable to their condition, and these funds are always managed with good husbandry and the most the most exact justice. The cottagers and labourers keep their children at home, their businesses being only to till and cultivate the earth, and therefore their education of as little consequence to the public. But the old and diseased among them are supported by hospitals, for begging is a trade unknown in this empire. And here it may perhaps divert the curious reader to give some account of my domestics and my manner of living in this country, during a residence of 9 months and 13 days. Having a head mechanically turned, and being likewise forced by necessity, I have made for myself a table and chair convenient enough out of the largest trees of the royal park. 200 sempstresses? I think that's supposed to be seamstresses. Sempstresses, whatever. Were employed to make me shirts and linen for my bed and table, all of the strongest and coarsest kind they could get, which, however, they were forced to quilt together in several folds, for the thickest was some degrees finer than lawn. Their linen is usually 3 inches wide, and 3 feet make a piece. It's sempstresses. Took my measure as I lay on the ground, one standing at my neck and the other at my middle, with a strong cord extended, that each held by the hand, while a third measured the length of the cord with a rule of an inch long. Then they measured my right thumb, and desired no more. For by mathematical computation, that twice round the thumb is once round the wrist, and so on to the neck and waist, and by the help of my old shirt, which I displayed on the ground before them for a pattern, they fitted me exactly. 300 tailors were employed in the same manner to make me clothes, but they had another contrivance for taking my measure. I kneeled down, and they raised a ladder from the ground to my neck. Upon this ladder one of them mounted, and let fall a plumb line from my collar to the floor, which just answered the length of my coat. But my waist and arms I measured myself. When my clothes were finished, which was done in my house, for the largest of theirs would not have been able to hold them, they looked like the patchwork made by ladies in England, only that mine were all of a colour. I had 300 cooks to dress my victuals in little convenient huts built about my house, where they and their families lived, and prepared 2 dishes apiece. I took up 20 waiters in my hand, and placed them on the table. 100 more attended below on the ground, some with dishes of meat, and some with barrels of wine and other liquors slung up on their shoulders, all of which the waiters above drew up, as I wanted. Oh. What? I'm not exactly sure if he means waiters as in people, or waiters as in, like, dumbbells. Like, in some buildings, they had, like, a chute where they would have a waiter that it was a device that you could transport items up and down through floors in the little chute. I'm not sure if he's talking actual people or the mechanism. Whatever. In a very ingenious manner, by certain cords, as we draw up a bucket in a well in England. That sounds like the machine. A dish of their meat was a good mouthful, and a barrel of their liquor a reasonable draught. Their mutton yields to ours, but their beef is excellent. I've had a sirloin so large that I have been forced to make 3 bites of it, but this is rare. My servants were astonished to see me eat it, bones and all, as in our country we do the leg of a lark. These geese and turkeys I usually ate a mouthful, and I confess they far exceeded ours. Of their smaller fowl, I could take up 20 or 30 at the end of my knife. One day, His Imperial Majesty, being informed of my way of living, desired that himself and his royal consort, with the young princes of the blood of both sexes, might have the happiness, as he was pleased to call it, of dining with me. They came accordingly, and I placed them in chairs of state upon my table, just over against me, with their guard about them. Flimnap, the Lord High Treasurer, attended there likewise with his white staff, and I observed he often looked on me with a sour countenance, which I would not seem to regard, but ate more than usual, in honour to my dear country, as well as to fill the court with admiration. I have some private reasons to believe that this visit from His Majesty gave Flimnap an opportunity of doing me ill offices to his master. That minister had always been my secret enemy, though he outwardly caressed me more than was usual through the moroseness of his nature. He represented to the emperor the low condition of his treasury, that he was forced to take up money at a great discount, that another weird word. Exchequer? Exchequer. I don't know what that word means. Oh my gosh, Google, calm down. X. There it is. Exchequer. A royal or national treasury. The bank accounts in which tax receipts and other public monies are paid, the funds of British government. The former government office responsible for collecting revenue and making payments on behalf of the sovereign, auditing official accounts, and trying legal cases relating to revenue. And the pronunciation? Exchequer. Okay. He represented to the emperor the low condition of his treasury, that he was forced to take up moneys at great discount, that exchequer bills would not circulate under 9% below par, that it had cost His Majesty above 1.5 million of sprugs, the greatest gold coin, about the bigness of a spangle, and upon the whole that it would be advisable in the emperor to take the first fair occasion of dismissing me. I am here obliged to vindicate the reputation of an excellent lady, who was an innocent sufferer upon my account. The treasurer took a fancy to be jealous of his wife, from the malice of some evil tongues, who informed him that her grace had taken a violent affection for my person, and the court scandal ran for some time that she once came privately to my lodging. This I solemnly declare to be a most infamous falsehood, without any grounds, farther than that her grace was pleased to treat me with all innocent marks of freedom and friendship. I own she came often to my house, but always publicly, not ever without 3 more in the coach, who were usually her sister and young daughter, and some particular acquaintance. But this was common to many other ladies of the court, and I will appeal to my servants around whether they at the time saw a coach at my door without their knowing what persons were in it. On those occasions, when a servant had given me notice, my custom was to go immediately to the door, and after paying my respects, to take up the coach and 2 horses very carefully in my hands, for if there were 6 horses, the postilion always unharnessed 4, and place them on a table, where I had fixed a movable rim, quite round, of 5 inches high, to prevent accidents. And I have often had 4 coaches and horses at once on my table, full of company, while I sat in my chair leaning my face towards them, and while I was engaged with one set, the coachman would gently drive the others round my table. I have passed many an afternoon very agreeably in these conversations, but I defy the treasurer or his 2 informers. I will name them and let them make the best of it. Lostrel and Drunlow. Hold on. to prove that any person ever came to me incognito except the secretary Reldressel, who was sent by express command of his Imperial Majesty, as I have before related. I should not have dwelt so long upon this particular, if it had not been a point wherein the reputation of a great lady is so nearly concerned, to say nothing of my own. Though I then had the honour to be a Nardak, which the treasurer himself is not, for all the world knows that he is only a glum. I'm sorry, the names are silly. I'm trying to say this seriously, but seriously. Anyways, a title inferior by 1 degree, as that of a marquis is to a duke in England. Yet I allow he preceded me in right of his post. These false informations, which I afterwards came to the knowledge of by an accident not proper to mention, made the treasurer show his lady for some time an ill countenance, and me a worse. And although he was at last undeceived and reconciled to her, yet I lost all credit with him, and found my interest declined very fast with the emperor himself, who was, indeed, too much governed by that favourite. And that's the end of that chapter, and I think it's a good time to call it nights. It's almost midnight. I appreciate the visits and the readings, and it looks like we have some goings-ons before he leaves Lilliput. At least a couple more chapters. Thank you for all attending the reading, and I will see you next Sunday. I hope you all have good sleep. Bye-bye.